Hi there, I'm James Dapperchi, and this is Coffee and a Case Note. Team, today we're going to talk about a joint venture that goes a little bit wrong, and as we work through that story together, we're going to understand a little bit more about Section 233 of the Corporations Act. So what we have is sort of a group of parties that we're loosely going to refer to as the plaintiff, and that actually includes the plaintiff's spouse. And that spouse is appointed essentially as an agent in a formal way to act on behalf of the plaintiff. So think of the plaintiff as a couple of different people that are over one side here. And think of A, we're going to call them A, we might call them the defendants, we might call them the others, we might call them the cross-claimants, but essentially they're in a similar position. We might refer to them in the singular, but we're referring to a couple of groups of little entities. And in essence, what happens between the plaintiff and the defendant is that they live in the same apartment building, and an apartment comes up for sale, and they enter into some negotiations and discussions together about, hey, maybe we should go in together and we should buy this apartment. Now there's an exchange of emails. There's one party who says, hey, I understand the deal is going to have 1, 2, 3 factors. What do you think? The reply might be yes, but in relation to factor 3, maybe we change that a little bit. And so there's a negotiation between the two where they are going back and forth and knocking coffee tables all over the place. What flows from that is that a deal is struck, what we might loosely call a joint venture arrangement. And the nature of that deal is that there's going to be a company incorporated. That company is going to be a trustee, and that trustee is going to be trustee of a unit trust. And then essentially we're going to split it down the middle, where half the shares in the trustee company, half the units issued in the unit trust are going to reside with the plaintiff, split down the middle. Then the other half of the shares in the trustee company and the other half of the units in the unit trust are going to sit here with the defendant. Each of them is going to be a director, right? So a fairly straight up and down 50-50 type scenario. Company's incorporated, trust is settled, we've got our units allocated, we're ready to go. What happens is an offer is made by the trustee company in relation to this house, and settlement is coming around the corner, and we don't settle. We don't complete the residential transaction that, look, some people know about how crazy Australian conveyancing law is. It always feels like dark magic to me when I hear about it, but in essence, the contract we entered into that says we're going to settle in 8 weeks, the trustee company entered into that contract, but that 8-week time or whatever was up, and the trustee company, because the plaintiff and the defendant hadn't finished arranging it, didn't have the finance. So this issue of how are we going to finance it, where are we going to get the money from, comes up. There's a bit of back and forth. There are a couple of attempts to get through it, and a really abbreviated version of what is agreed is the plaintiff themselves is going to finance half of it, sort of from their own financing and their own money and their own way of going about it, and the defendant is going to finance it by way of a bridging loan, which you probably know better than I do, is a loan designed to be for a short period of time at a really high interest rate. It's designed to bridge from one financial position where you don't own the house to another financial position where you've got long-term financing in place. It's a bridging loan. And so that is how the trustee company goes ahead and purchases the property. Now, as time passes, it's within the contemplation of both parties of like, hey, we've got to get rid of this bridging loan, we've got to figure out what the long-term arrangement is. And so there are discussions with a couple of the major banks in Australia as to who's going to be our lender, what are the sort of terms going to be, and our defendant, because they're self-employed, because they haven't completed tax returns for some time, they're not the most appealing borrower in the eyes of these organised lenders. Normally these lenders want to see years and years of records of transactions and years of records of tax and these sorts of things, and the defendant is not really in a position to provide those. And so with a number of strategies considered, what ends up happening is our plaintiff says, hey, why don't I borrow the money and then I'll on-loan that to the trustee company in order for the trustee company to repay it. If I'm going to do that, this is the crucial bit, so we're brains on. If I'm going to do that, then what is required is there needs to be some sort of commercial return for me as the on-loaning party. Does that make sense? I'm going to borrow from the bank, and then I'm going to on-loan what I've borrowed from the bank onto the trust, and I need to be able to tell the bank that there's some kind of commercial return there. And in essence, that is what happens. The nature of the commercial return is that our plaintiff, by the relevant entity, is going to charge an additional 2.01% interest on the money that's borrowed. And if I can just take you through that, because that might sound a little bit arbitrary, we have the trustee is going to pay 4.5% interest on the borrowed funds. That's more or less agreed between the parties. And the plaintiff is able to borrow the money at 2.49%. And so what's the difference between 5 and 2.49? What's the difference between 4.5 and 2.49? The answer is 2.01. And so the arrangement sort of clicks into gear. We've got the money having been borrowed to get rid of the defendant's bridging loan. We've got the 2.01% being paid from the trustee company back to the plaintiffs. And so then the plaintiffs are able to pay they're able to take the 2.01, but also pay the 2.49% that they owe back to the bank. Time passes. In that time, a number of complexities happen. One of them is that the defendants in time become a little less impressed with the 2.01% margin, and they come to this view that they feel that the plaintiff said to them that, hey, if you don't do 2.01% as a margin, the bank won't lend us the money. They come to the view that the plaintiffs have sort of forced them into this view, into this misapprehension that it had to be 2.01% or there'd be no loan. That's the view they take, and they become increasingly unimpressed with this over time. Now, the plaintiffs also become unimpressed over time because the plaintiffs are pressing for things like strata levies to be paid. So time passes, the trustee company that owns this property now, that's part of a strata scheme, racks up debts in the form of unpaid strata levies and of imbalanced telephone cameras. And what in essence happens is that these debts accrue over time, and the defendants refuse to make any contribution towards them. And so the strata committee, or the owners corporation, the strata committee causes the owners corporation to sue the trustee company for these unpaid levies. And so the plaintiffs are grumpy, saying, why aren't you funding this trustee company? We need to contribute enough money together. What is going on? Like, we're getting sued over here, or the trustee company is getting sued over here. You're half in this trustee company. Give it some funding. Let's deal with this. And the defendant's grumpy over here, saying, I feel like you've engaged in what the defendant refers to as profiteering in relation to this 2.01% margin, that if I had my time again, I'm not sure is ideal, and I think you have, in essence, breached your duty and caused me to have this misapprehension that it was absolutely necessary. So each side is grumpy with the other. So let's turn back to think about what the litigation is about. The plaintiff kicks off the litigation to say, I want to dispose of the defendant, I want a share sale. I want to be the purchaser in relation to a share sale. I want to buy out the defendant at this sort of number. And failing that, I want a winding up of the company on the just and equitable basis. There's a deadlock, there's been a falling out, we need to get this thing wound up. Now, the defendant cross-claims, in essence, in relation to that and says, well, I also want to buy out, and I might want to buy out on slightly different terms. I might want to be just the direct purchaser of the property, or there's a version of it where I might be buying out the shares or the units in the trust or something like this. And I also want there to be an account from the plaintiff, including the plaintiff's spouse, in relation to what I say, as the defendant, is a breach of duty to the trustee, where this 2.01% wasn't required at all. So they've breached their duties in relation to the company. And so we've got these competing claims, and the court is then forced to work through in fairly close detail, what was said in this email in October 21. What was said in this email in November 2021? What was said in this email in December 2021? And to try to work through and understand precisely the nature of the arrangement reached between the parties. Now, the really short point is that there's no evidence before the court saying that the plaintiff ever said to the defendant, you must agree to the 2.01% margin because that is what the bank requires. The evidence more suggests that the parties understand the bank needs some commercial return, needs to see some additional amount for the plaintiff if they're going to on-loan this amount, but there's no evidence suggesting that, it's got to be 2.01%. What the court does hold, is that the 2.01% was agreed, in essence. It was part of the arrangement, and so because it was disclosed and because the parties then went on as part of that arrangement, the 2.01% applies. And so the defendant's claim that the plaintiffs had been oppressive in their conduct fails. Right? The 2.01% is found to be fine, found to be part of the arrangement, found not to be a breach of the duty. But don't forget, the plaintiffs still have their oppression claim on foot against the defendant. Now, there are a couple of little heads of this. One of the oppression claims the plaintiffs bring says, hey, you were so slow on your tax returns, and that stuffed us around with finance. Thank you so very much. That stuffed us around with finance, and so that's oppressive. Said that, look, you caused these strata levies to be incurred, and various other complexities like this. The short point is the plaintiffs succeed in some of them. For example, the strata levies are found to be oppressive, fails in some. The delay with tax returns is found not to be oppressive, but in essence, there are some successes there for the plaintiff. And so the court comes to the view of like, look, these parties are deadlocked. We've got to end this relationship. We've got to deal with this now. And so the court finds a way to do that, considers, hey, should I have this party buy out that party buy out this party, and there's sort of a balancing act there. Should we do a winding up? Should we cause one party to be able to buy the property itself? The short answer is the court causes an order to be made that the plaintiff buy out the defendant from the units in the unit trust and the shares in the company, and that means the plaintiff essentially got what they want. And the court sort of said, well, that being the case, it looks to me like the plaintiff should also get their costs of the proceedings too. I hope that discussion assisted you, and I hope you don't have just one hot drink but two in your journey through your day, and I look forward to speaking again soon over another coffee or two and in respect of another case note. Cheers.